When I started off designing, I didn't have YouTube tutorials. Like, this is like the MySpace days. Like, if I was lucky, there's like a book at the library where it's like Photoshop for Dummies or something.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Jesse Nyberg podcast. Today we're here with Fuller, talented creative designer, works in the music industry mainly. How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
Not bad. What you kind of been up to this week?
Man, today I actually worked on some graphics for Paul McCartney, so I'm super stoked on that. It's like a dream
That's
job.
dope.
I'm trying to knock out all of the remaining Beatles, or just design for the Beatles, like before I buy the farm. That's the goal.
Yeah.
So hopefully I can get some approvals. But yeah, that's been most of today. But pretty light on client work at the moment. How about yourself?
Okay. Yeah, I've been a little more light on client work too. I feel like the 2022 like has not started out super strong for me in terms of like people coming to my door. You know, I've had a few things here and there and some existing stuff I always work on, but not a lot of like new things coming in, it seems like, quite yet.
Yeah, I guess for me, like, I mean, comparatively, like all of 2020 and into 2021 was super light, and now it kind of feels like we might be ramping up a little bit, but I don't take too much stock in that, because
right,
you never know at this point what the hell's gonna happen.
I always tell people to, like, you know, when you have those super like fat months, don't like change the way you're living, because then when you have the low months, you don't want it to feel like you're living without or anything, you know, like just keep it kind of on the average with your expenses and whatnot.
Totally. Yeah, no, that's very smart. That's definitely a good way to move, for sure.
Yeah. It makes sense you're working with Paul, because I know he's about to go on tour and all this shit. Like, he seems like to be in kind of a second wave of like getting the younger audience and stuff and people to know about him and whatnot.
Yeah, and it definitely shows in like the art direction I'm getting. It's very like young, very like Urban Outfitters-y, like online ceramics vibes. Like, yeah,
Right.
You're dead on with that.
For sure. I was wondering, because a lot of people, I'm sure, know you from either some of the asset packs or textiles, things like that you sell, or just more of like a, I guess, more of a business, you know, than anything, or other than just some individual designer. You kind of operate as, like, I see your ads everywhere, you know, pretty much. But I'm wondering if you could give me a little bit of background on you just as like a designer and a creative, and how you kind of, I guess, got into this industry.
For sure. So I started off like in bands as a teenager, and I think I sort of fell in love with music merch like that way, just by like wearing band tees myself, playing in bands. Sure. And then it got to the point where our band needed merchandise, and a couple of the dudes in the group like kind of could work their way around like Photoshop enough to make like some pins or like maybe some album artwork, but nobody could really do like straight up band t-shirts. And I was like, man, I love band tees. I wear them all the time. Could I maybe try my hand at designing them? And so I found out that I was pretty good at it. And like growing up, I was always a very artistic kid. I was always in the back of the class, like drawing instead of paying attention. And so if you combine that with my love for music, it just sort of made sense. And so it sort of just springboarded from there. Like I did t-shirts for my band that led to like playing with other bands and them seeing our merch and be like, yo, like, oh, I did that merch. And so it's sort of just, it snowballed from there. And that led to just working with like lots of local bands, and then trying to reach out. Like, I'm lucky enough that like my brain has always sort of been half like sort of entrepreneur and half like creative. I feel like I know enough like creative people who just like don't have that. And so right away I was like, I mean, I could probably turn this into some sort of like business. And being in college at the time, like it was definitely helpful to have like some extra income coming in. And so I basically just parlayed like working on stuff for my band into like a part-time business. Mm-hmm. And that led to working with a merchandising company in Orlando who primarily worked with like universities, and they did a little bit of music merch stuff at the time. Yeah. And I worked there just sort of remotely from Wisconsin. They were in Orlando. And so that sort of led to like a cool relationship of like working with some of their bands. And like they had this company called Design Spin that basically was like a database of t-shirt designs, like pre-made t-shirt designs that like any band or any company could just go on and buy. And I basically became a part of that, like a contributor to that, creating these pre-made designs. And that I think sort of got me in the mode of like being able to work it at high volume, because I would create like 10 of these graphics sometimes in like a day. Just cause it was sort of like more of like a hustle thing of like just trying to make like something dope that would work as a band shirt.
That makes sense. It kind of seems like a natural evolution then for you to get into selling the actual pre-made. I mean, that's a little bit more of a refined version of just like a template you plug and play, but that's kind of what you're doing now, just with selling like the textiles and the mock-ups and all that stuff.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, this was like, I guess like the concept I think is still cool. And I see it on Instagram all the time where people will just be like, they'll post like these pre-made designs. Anyone can find them. But this was like, at the time, it was sort of like a weird concept. Yeah. And I guess to me, like, it kind of caught my eye just like conceptually on its own. And that sort of just led me to think like, well, who are the guys behind this company, and get to know them better as like, cause they were the same age as me, this company in Orlando. And so I ended up moving there, becoming a full-time designer. That turned into sort of more of a creative director position. That's when I started working with like Childish Gambino, 30 Seconds to Mars, Haim, like some bigger names. And we just kept growing. And it sort of got to the point where like, we didn't really see eye to eye anymore as far as like the design side of things. Cause they were really like their bottom line was like, we print t-shirts for bands. We do tour fulfillment. The design stuff is a part of that, but it's not like the bottom line really. It's not really
they don't care about it as much.
They just didn't care about it as much. And I was like, man, I think we have a cool opportunity to be like a design firm. And like we had hired another designer besides myself. I was working with freelance designers. But since we didn't see eye to eye, I was like, I'm just going to go freelance. And that's where I've been like the last 6-7 years is just freelance. And then the pandemic is what started the whole like Fuller Mo thing. Like I never did any of this before that. It was just out of necessity because all of my client work just disappeared.
Right. You didn't go to school for design, right? You were just in college for something else at the time?
Yeah. Yes. I went to school for journalism originally. Like, I thought I'd be writing for Rolling Stone. That was like my goal, like Rolling Stone, Alternative Press, something. Just because I wanted to get close to the music, like, you know, being in a touring band would have been dope. But like, I don't know. I just always felt like as long as my job could involve music in some way, I would be very happy.
I mean, I think that's what most of the people that are in like the music industry from like a like adjacent position like that, you know, writers, people working in merch, a lot of them, you know, they were in bands and then they kind of had this realization like, well, shit, I might not, I'm getting a little bit older. I don't know if I'm going to make it, you know, like as a actual member. So like they still have that passion though. So it's like, let me kind of get in there from a different angle, you know, and be still involved in it.
For sure. I know so many designers in the music industry, especially who are all in bands. Like I know designers who like were in pretty sizable bands too. So yeah, there's definitely a parallel that seems to happen with those two.
What kind of band were you in?
It was like a post-hardcore band. Like, you know, we wanted to be the next At the Drive-In or something, you know,
hardcore, metalcore, like all that, even indie, post-punk, all that is the most, I think, people I know that do the design shit because they're making their own merch and their own album art. And, you look at I used to go to a lot of these hardcore shows, you look at a lot of their merch, it's just like remixes of like popular logos or some shit, thrown onto like into like their own band name or whatever.
Yeah, totally. And like for me, like I should mention, like it was half like band merch that I was interested in, but like streetwear, I've always been a big streetwear head, like since I was in my late teens. And so that sort of like also fed my interest in just like being creative and like making t-shirts. Like I've always just like dope t-shirts. Like that's really, all it comes down to.
That makes sense. Did it, so before the pandemic and then you said that's what gave you the idea to do like this, more like fuller as a business. What, other than the pandemic though, what made you think like, oh, I should start like creating what you're selling now? Like what gave you the ideas for that other than, kind of your history in that scene a little bit?
I honestly, I started seeing ads for Vector Lab. If you've heard of that. It's like a lot of like surf and skate, and it's mostly surf inspired like logos and icons and graphics that are pre-made. And I just kept seeing ads for this. And I was like, man, I'm fairly certain that this dude or this company has been running this same ad for like 2 years. And it was just very interesting to me that like that was a business model that could exist where like people were continuously finding this company, people who were serious about design, people who were just getting started, people of all walks of life when it came to like their level of experience with design. And so seeing that sort of interested me, and like I was already doing the YouTube videos. So I had a little bit of an audience that was starting to grow. But like doing the education stuff first, like I would consider myself like an educator, like on YouTube first, and then the design packs and the different like design tools are just like another thing where I'm just like, hey, here's another thing that's available. It's just like, I can't really advertise the YouTube stuff as much. So I think a lot of people know me maybe first from seeing an ad,
because there's less of like a call to action, other than watch this video. It's kind of like if they want to watch it, they'll watch it. The buying shit, it's a lot more like an ad could maybe intrigue someone that didn't even know like that existed, Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And like, I don't know, I guess for me, I don't know. I try to like be thoughtful about the way the ads are put together too, where like the first one I ever made was just like very straightforward, where it's just like, yo, I'm Fuller. Here's some artwork I've done. Here's some designs I've done for different bands. And I have a YouTube, and I made some stuff. So check it out. And it worked really well. Like I was very surprised at like how well it worked with like, it just wasn't slick. Like I'm just not like a slick guy. I've never been like great at like high production value, things like that, like fucking, I don't know, sound effects and things like that. Right. Yeah. I'm just very, very meat and potatoes of like, I don't know, here's some stuff I did. If you think it's cool, great. If not, that's cool too.
Well, people try to, companies that, whether you think that's like, to your fault or whatever, like nowadays companies are like trying to reverse engineer that. They're like, let's make this look like someone just made it on their phone, but it never does, because they still like, they over Hollywood it, and it's like a TikTok, but it's at like 4K. So you're like, what the fuck? That's obviously not recorded on someone's phone,
I know it is funny how that happened. Like, and honestly, like the YouTube video that's done the best for me was shot on my phone. Like, I think if you you should always put the information and content first, and like production value is like nice to have. But in this day and age, like people are used to just like using their phone for stuff. And like, I don't know. I really love where we're heading in terms of like people just wanting to like put content first versus like thinking they need all this expensive equipment, thinking they need to spend a ton of money on different software or lighting or cameras or whatever. Like, it's super dope to me. And that's what I always tell like anyone starting off with YouTube, like, as long as you're putting the information first and like trying to provide value first, like, it doesn't really matter if you have like super great equipment, but it's a bonus.
I always tell people, you know, like the idea, the concept obviously is at the forefront. And if you're going to spend money on anything, spend it on a mic rather than like, I don't give a fuck if your shit is recorded on like a Nokia, but if it sounds like shit, it's going to be hard for me to listen to like a super long video, you know?
100%. Yeah. Looking back at like some of those old videos I did, like, it would have been very nice to have some better audio. And like, if anyone ever asks about it, like, I always preface them watching it with like, yo, like, please forgive the audio quality. I promise the content is there if you can just bear with me. But I'm totally with you on that.
Because it's audio. When in like, you know, when you're probably making some of that early stuff, like, you know, you curb your expectations and you just think like, whatever, you know, here's this video. And the fact that it does well with bad audio just means that like you weren't even really expecting it and it kind of just did well. So you're like, well, shit, maybe now I'll grab the equipment or whatever. We saw that it worked. Yeah,
totally. Like, I never expect, like, when I first started doing videos, it literally was just like me thinking like, I know how to do this design stuff. I don't see anyone else on YouTube, like, who at least had like the same background as me and like had like design for a lot of artists and bands, like doing videos. Like, there's plenty of designers making super dope videos, but just like that little space, it didn't seem like anyone was really doing it. And so it just kind of, just felt like this is something I would have liked to have seen when I was first starting. And I feel like if you approach things that way, it can turn out better than you expect.
That's like the age old kind of advice, is like, make the thing you want to watch, you know, with anything, a movie, a video, you know, it's not, obviously you're not working with clients, like doing whatever you want, but if you're making your own content, it's like, if you don't like it, how do you expect someone else to like it? Because that's like, you have to be able to enjoy that shit, or else you're going to hate it after working on it for like a week, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. I was just thinking about this earlier today, where like, if I had to explain like designing in the music industry and like working with different clients, like, obviously first you should definitely try to like impress yourself or like be happy with what you're doing. But like, it's so different than like if I was just a designer on YouTube, where like if I'm satisfied with it, that's kind of where it ends. And like, if it's entertaining along the way, that's cool. But like to get into the mindset where it's like, I have to be thinking about the client, whether it's like an art director, and having worked with them before, like, know what they like to see. And then I also have to be thinking about like the history of the band or the artist, what their merch has looked like before, what it looks like now, where they're trying to go. And then a step further, I have to be thinking about like, you know, if I'm lucky, I'm already a fan of the artist or the band. So I can be like, well, you know, what kind of Outcast shirt would I want to wear? Yeah. But you have to be thinking about like the end consumer and the fan of like, what are they into? Like, you know, cause I don't know. I feel like if you're not like checking off all those boxes, it can be very difficult to do it like as a career, like long term.
Right. What, so is majority of your freelance work just working on basically just merch in the music industry? Are you doing any other stuff?
No, like that's the majority of it. I might be dabbling into professional like sports, like something with the NBA, and I don't know how much like I can talk about it yet. Sure. But I'm super hyped because that's always been a dream. Like, I've always been into like I've always had an obsession with like 90s basketball. Yeah. I feel like, I don't know, that's like a thing with maybe like 30 plus year olds who like grew up hooping in like middle school and like during like the golden age of like NBA basketball. So that's something I'm really hyped on, and hopefully I can do that. Cause like, I don't know, when you get to the point where like you've designed for so many like big artists and bands, like getting excited is kind of like difficult. And I would love to get to the point where I'm like feeling super fresh about like working in a particular industry, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's a big crossover too in just aesthetic and like interest between like 90s hip hop and 90s basketball, just in terms of the people who like it and also the types of like the way the shit looked, like all the vintage shirts. Like you could replace like a 90s Bulls shirt with like, you know, Snoop Dogg or Tupac or some shit, and it's kind of the same layout, you know, other than the poses they're in.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, yeah, I feel like I've always loved that aesthetic. Like it's probably just like reverting back to like the 10 and 11-year-old version of myself, where I just like, I don't know. It's just that stuff sunk in with me super hard and just like never left. And I'm all about it.
When you first launched like the textiles and things that are reminiscent of that time, did you think that there was like a big market for it? Because that shit blew up not only in what you were doing, but just in the collective consciousness of like fashion. Like everyone the past 3 or 4 years was into that style. So like, did you see that happening and that was part of your like business plan, or was this just like kind of those parallels were more luck or something?
Yeah, it wasn't like a conscious decision to like make that sort of thing because it was like I thought it was like trending or something like that. Mm-hmm. It was more of like I did a video where I designed like a Snoop Dogg shirt. It was like a tutorial to do like a bootleg style rap shirt because I had done it for years for different artists. And so I was like, this is a style I get asked to do a lot. I could probably show people how I do it, throw it up on YouTube. And it just sort of started taking off. And that's when like I would get little comments asking about like, what are the fonts you use? Or like, what do you recommend? Or like all these questions, particularly about that style. And so that sort of, I guess, led me, that's probably like more of the entrepreneur brain when that kind of turned on. And I was like, people would probably like to have some tools to better help them make this style. Mm-hmm. Besides like the education part and like learning from scratch, like it would probably be useful for some people to like have some stuff that they can just mess around with too. And so that sort of fed the machine of like, well, can I do this with like 90s hip hop stuff? Like, can I do this with sports stuff? Like, can I do like, and it just sort of snowballed from there into like other genre, heavy metal, like different genres, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's, you know, a smart way to think. And you kind of, a lot of people may not take advantage of that opportunity when it comes because you think, you know, oh yeah, like someone's asking me this, like I'll just explain it. But then you explain it like 10, 20, 30 times and you're like, well, maybe people don't just want it to be explained. Maybe they want it given to them for like a small price, you know? And then that's just how a business, you had the demand before you even had to worry about like what you were supplying pretty much.
Yeah, I guess so. And like, I mean, to this day, like even when you give them a tool that's as simple as like dragging something to Photoshop and then just like clicking around, people still need even that explained. So that never really ends. And I say this in like so many videos, like literally, like my hope is people get to the point, like I'm talking about like a designer who's just getting started and they're watching my videos and they're getting the tools and the presets or whatever. Like I want them to get to the point where like they're deconstructing stuff that they buy from me. They're making their own stuff. They're not using it at all. Like, I just think that's like, that really is the ultimate goal, I think, as a designer. Like for me, I make my own textures and I use other people's textures. I make my own styles and I use other people's styles and I deconstruct them. So I think it's just a matter of like not thinking super like in a binary way where it's like I have to do all this myself or I have to use other people's stuff. It's just like finding that a blend of both. I think that's super healthy, and I think it's ultimately the most beneficial thing as a designer.
Mm-hmm. And there's so many people nowadays that sell like assets or design things, and like there's 5 to 10 people that I know somewhat personally where like they make my favorite thing of this, I use that. They make my favorite thing of this, I use that, and I just make my own little pack of my own shit and everyone else's. But speaking of that, do you ever feel like worried that there's too much of that shit, that people are gonna not like, it's gonna run out this like business model basically?
I don't really, because I've been designing for over a decade, and in that time I've continued to use a bunch of different packs and different textures from all sorts of people.
Yeah.
For me, like more is more. Like I encourage designers to make their own stuff, to offer it on websites. Like I honestly, like a site like Creative Market to me is like, it's good to have your stuff on there, but like if you really want to make like design tools and like sell them yourself, like there's no better time than now. And especially like what the pandemic taught me was that like having these extra sources of income is like pretty crucial. So I'm not really worried about it. It's like, I don't know. I always think about it the same way as like any other creative thing. Like people listen to like multiple bands at a time. People like,
right.
I don't know. Like sometimes people stop at like Burger King and sometimes they're at McDonald's. Like it's just like, I feel like nowadays there's access to everyone and everything. So I'm not really concerned. I think my biggest concern is like, I want to make sure that like I'm making something unique as possible. I don't have any interest in like looking at someone else's stuff and seeing that it's working and like copying them or something. I really don't. And I think like stuff like textures, like how many textures can we really have? I think that like everything has its like a different use. Like a company like Black Market, I think has a specific like customer base. Like I love Black Market. I use Black Market. I feel like I have customers who wouldn't understand some of their stuff because it's just more complex. It's and so I think that's another thing I'm thinking about, like trying to make stuff that's easy to use, but is still useful, and just really just trying to be unique, like in the way that I approach it.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like, so a lot of the style you work in as a freelancer is kind of the same style that in these things that you're selling, like bootleg shirts, and people come to you for vintage and things. Are you confident in like your connections with your clients to where like you're not worried about selling this stuff because you're almost like selling to your own competition as a designer?
Not really. Like I try to put myself out of business, as crazy as that sounds. Like it fuels me to like be better. Like if I know that I'm like teaching all these people, and I don't know, like definitely at the beginning, like when I started doing YouTube videos, like showing how to do certain stuff, I got messages from designers being like, hey man, like, I don't know if you should be doing this, like giving up the secret sauce. I'm like, really? Like, I don't know. For me, like maybe it's just like a part of my personality or something, but like I'm confident enough. Like I've done this long enough that like I feel like people are not going to like stop asking me to do stuff, or I'm not going to get like, I'm not going to get outworked by someone because I teach them how to use a texture. I don't know.
Right.
Like I feel good about it. Like I want there to be more people who are interested in music merch, because it's become such a huge, like over the course of maybe the last like 5 or 6 years, especially, like it's been so like predominant in like culture, like from like Life of Pablo, like merch, like whatever it was, a Justin Bieber like Purpose tour stuff, like that's in like, it was in like Urban Outfitters. Like I think for the first time, a lot of kids are understanding that that's like a blueprint that you can follow. Like someone is designing that stuff and they're getting to be creative and they're getting to play within like the music space. And that's cool. And I want to make sure like, I want more people to know about it. You know, I don't want to hide that, you know?
Yeah. I've noticed too with like gatekeeping ideas and things like that. If you do that, someone's going to figure it out some other way. And then all you ended up doing was giving them like a bad feeling about you, you know, by being like, nah, like kick rocks. I'm not going to tell you how to do this shit or whatever. Cause people, if people want to figure out how to do some shit, like more than likely they're just going to, might just take them a few more steps in the process.
Yeah. And they're ultimately not going to do it the same as you anyways. Like I can teach 5 people how to do, I can show them exactly how I do something, and they might start off doing it the same as me, but just tweaking things along the way and injecting their own personality and their own style. Give them, you know, a couple months, all 5 of them will be doing it completely different. I guarantee it.
Right.
And so I've never had an issue with like showing people how I do something. Like on the other hand, like I do have plenty of people who watch my YouTube videos and copy it down to the same font and the same exact same gradient. Like they're looking at like the hex values in the video, like everything.
Yeah.
And they're putting it out as like their clothing brand. And it's like, it's hard to police that. And I don't care. Like,
yeah,
I know when I put that stuff out there that people are going to do that. I just have to hope that I'm inspiring more people to take what I show them and run with it and do their own thing, you know?
Yeah, because I mean, when I watch like tutorials and things, sometimes it fucks me up because if it's something complex, like I confuse myself along the way. But whenever I watch a tutorial, like I don't recreate whatever they're creating. I watch it and I'm creating my own version of whatever I wanted to do. And then sometimes it messes it up because like it doesn't directly translate to whatever they were doing, you know? But I never understood the idea of like, because if you do it perfectly, like one of one, it's kind of like, what are you going to do with that when you're done with it? You know, it's not like I wouldn't feel like comfortable being like, look, I came up with this, you know, when I just did it like verbatim or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, I guess it's like photography versus like painting. Like, I don't know, to me, it's a lot more interesting to look at a chair and like do my own version of it than just like take a picture and it's like, now I've got the same exact thing. Like, yeah. I'm with you. Like, I don't ever follow what they're doing. Like, I don't use the same image. I just take what they taught me and I apply it to like other stuff. And then I tweak stuff along the way. I guess like for you and I, like we have enough experience in Photoshop, that we can like make those adjustments and like change certain things and like be satisfied with the results. I think a lot of like people when they're just starting off, it's like they need to follow it down to the T because they don't understand the complexities of some of the other functions, you know?
That's fair. That's probably where I've messed up on my own shit in the past when I was first starting out. I'd follow something and try to do it my own way in like After Effects or something. And I get to like some weird step and I'm like, what the fuck's going on? Like, I don't even know where all these tools are and shit. Like some of these dudes on the tutorials are so fast and they're hitting hotkeys and I'm like, shit, like there he goes. He's off to the races. I'm not going to be able to follow this.
For sure. For sure. And you know what? Like I found out very early on that like, since I didn't, when I started off designing, I didn't have YouTube tutorials. Like this is like the MySpace days. Like if I was lucky, there's like a book at the library where it's like Photoshop for dummies or something. Yeah. And so a lot of the stuff that I taught myself is like, this is the way that I figured out. This is what worked for me. And then I get on YouTube and I'm like showing people and I'm like seeing the comments like, why don't you just use the whatever tool? I'm like, I don't know, maybe I should be, but this is what I've been doing for 10 years and this is the way I learned it. So I don't know, like it's good, definitely good in a sense. Like I've learned a ton just from people commenting and being like, hey man, just so you know, there's an easier way to do this. Like, that's great. I'll do that in the next video. But yeah, it's just funny. When I get DMs or whatever and people are like, so how do I start? Like, where do I start with this? Like where can I get more info? I'm like, man, if you only knew what I went through, like to learn this stuff, like it's I understand like how my parents feel, you know, with how they grew up.
I was talking with someone else on my podcast one time because everyone's very and like we just talked about, open and about like, not gatekeeping these days. And here's where I got this. Here's this font. Here's how to do this. But then I almost think there's to a certain point where we like selective withholding of information maybe can be good because it's turned some people into like they don't know how to do anything because they weren't like. They're like, well, you tell them like, well, do it this way or like come up with some idea for this. And then they're like, well, where's the asset for that or whatever, or like, where do I get that font or that text style or something? And it's like, some of the best shit's going to come from you having to like meet resistance and then figure out some, creative like way around it. And I sometimes think like if stuff becomes too accessible, like the overall like quality may start to go down over time.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, I think like for me, I get a lot of questions like that where people ask like the most like rudimentary sort of questions where it's like literally it's if I just answered like use Google, that wouldn't be uncommon. Like, but I don't know. I'm like a nice enough guy that like I try to be like helpful and explain everything and send a lot of like voice memos to people, like thoroughly explaining stuff. But another part of me, to your point, like I just think like, man, if I don't reply and I give them like a week to like wonder, I'll bet they'll figure it out because I did it.
Right.
Now they have access to 1,000 times more types of information than I am.
And I'm all for helping people, and I try my best to, reply to almost everything. But what kind of aggravates me is when like people ask me stuff that like I'm already saying or I already said, or it's like right there in the fucking caption, and then they're like, what font or whatever, and I wrote it in the thing, and it's kind of like, then you're the asshole, not me for not answering, because you didn't even do your like due diligence or whatever to look into the basic caption at that point.
Yeah, I know. I have to wonder, like, I mean, with any sort of not necessarily just creative thing, but like if you're interested in something, like the interest might only last for so long. Like, I was really into, baseball when I was in middle school, like into high school. And then I became interested in something else. But, if it's really like something in you, like being creative thing, like you're not even going to think about like, you're going to get as much information as you possibly can about something. And if you, like you said, meet resistance, if you care enough, like you'll just run right through it, or you'll find some creative way around it. But like, either you're interested and you're passionate enough about it, or you're not. And I feel like there are a lot of people nowadays where it's like, I want to start a clothing brand. Like, where do I start? It's like, it's just so like such a vague question. Like if you're asking me and you haven't even put in like the work of like, well, why do I want to start a clothing brand? Like, if I do, like, what do I want to say? Like, how do I have a unique perspective? Like, there's so many questions you should ask yourself that are very like surface level that you should definitely get to before you like, I don't know, start a Shopify, or something.
Right. I think everything's so accessible these days that like people can start, download some of your shit, download some other shit, create some kind of, streetwear shirt. And then they already did all that. And then now they're trying to put the message into it. And it's like, you need that shit beforehand. You need why does your company even need to exist? Because there's a million fucking brands probably that get started. I mean, more realistically, probably thousands of brands that get started every day. And it's like, you don't even end up ever hearing about them because they were just another copy of some other shit. They didn't have a unique perspective to offer people.
Exactly. Yeah, that's always the first thing I say to people. Like when they ask me like about starting a brand, like I'm not the brand expert, but I do know that if you put yourself into it, like actually put yourself into it, like what do I really like? Like what what is the Venn diagram of like maybe like I have a brand that's kind of like mixed with like 90s basketball and goth aesthetic. Like, all right, maybe that's something there. And even then, I'll try to find other brands and make sure it's not like, well, it looks just like that, or like finding unique angles. I think is paramount in starting a brand today, when on Instagram you're met with just like brand after brand after brand. It's just like,
Right.
you have to go the extra mile to like make sure, I feel like, that your perspective is a little bit more unique than the next if you want to stand out.
You know Duran?
Yeah.
You know that guy? So
Yeah.
I always think that you and him are responsible for like a million brands being created, you know, from like the types of tutorials you do and the assets you sell. Like it either looks like that or like that. And then, or it looks like its own thing. And I'm like, damn, like they're really like almost like a blueprint that a lot of people follow in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. His style is super dope. And I've talked to him a bunch of times, like, and I've never even thought of that. But like, for me, like, it's interesting because my background is just like music merch. So it's more like commercial. And that's not to say that like his style is dope. But it's like the stuff that I try to do is like, it's more influenced by literally like my career and like trying to satisfy like someone shopping at Hot Topic or Target. But
it's more broad a little bit.
It's a little bit more broad. Yeah, it's a little more universal. But I definitely envy like someone with his style, because I see like other brands catching on, and like, you know, that'll turn into like huge bands catching on, and like, you know, working for a big merchandising company as I did in the past. I had to sort of be in the know of like, you know, being into streetwear was super helpful for me, because I always sort of had my finger on the pulse. And so like I would try to influence like bands and artists in a way of like, no, like this is what the kids are into. Like they're really into like, I don't know, like for a time it was like the drop tail shirts and like a lot of black and white. And like this was like you know, so I think like you have to sort of be able to recognize like when something is trendy, but also like, I don't know, having the ability to be like a jack of all trades, and do something, if you have to, that's like a little bit more mainstream and is going to appeal to like, I don't know, the average consumer. Like that's helpful.
Right. I think that's almost like the fact that you kind of got into this field and industry from like an entrepreneurial standpoint, and you didn't have like this design background in terms of school. I almost think that that's one of your biggest strengths, because you're not hindered by like this idea. Like a lot of designers get obsessed with like, they get emotional about the things they're creating. Like this is my art or this is my design. And like, they don't want to fuck with it. They don't want to change it. They don't want it to adapt to like what's going on. But since like you were doing it that other way, it's kind of like, oh, this is what's going on. Like, all right, let's work on it this way. You know, you almost have I guess, I don't know if it's like other people have it, not an ego thing, but I think people get attached to the things they create more than they should, you know?
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of a weird, I don't know if this comparison will make sense, but like years ago, like I kind of figured out that like I wasn't going to be like Kendrick Lamar, who's like a rapper's rapper. Like you ask like like someone who loves rap, like like contemporary rappers, like who's the guy? Like they'd probably go towards Kendrick before they'd go towards like Drake. But I would be more like a Drake, because Drake, I guess, has some bars, but he's not like, no real like hip hop head is going to be like, all right, top 5, it's Tupac, it's Biggie, it's Drake, Big L, like, you know, but Drake's got hits. He can make hits. And so I'm happy to be like someone who can just make hits versus like a designer's designer. Cause I don't know, maybe some of this is like the, what's it called? Like when you're, what is it called? Like you are really good, but you don't think that you're that good. What's that called?
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. Yeah. That's exactly it. So maybe some of it is that, but like, I don't know. I've never considered myself like a designer's designer. I'm just someone that I think can like satisfy what is needed for a project. And I have the skill set to pull that off. And so I'm good with that. So I don't know. I always draw parallels between music and being a designer.
That's a good point.
Like, it's awesome if you have a background in like music theory and like you can read sheet music. It's going to be very helpful. And this is speaking, I guess, to like having an academic background in design. But I don't know, like Paul McCartney can't read music. He seems to do okay. The same way that like having knowledge of color theory and typography and all that stuff is not going to be a disadvantage, but it's not necessary. It can just be like, sometimes if you could just create like a vibe, like you can create a whole career just like knowing what like looks cool, which can't really be taught, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That is a good point. I like the idea of, you know, the designers, just because there's that in everything, you know, comedian, music, like, yeah, like someone like Big L, you said, like, I think that's an even almost a better example than Kendrick because of the scale of their career. I mean, one of the best like lyricists of all time and like, you know, king of punchlines and all that, but he's never going to have the same influence as, like someone like Drake or I don't know, like nowadays like Jack Harlow or someone like that that's going to be like this big almost like pop star in a way, even though they're like a hip hop artist. So that's cool that you like, I think having that realization is to your advantage, because I have the same feeling where I don't think that I'm ever going to be the best designer that I know, especially when I roll with these people that are fucking badass and like I really look up to them. But I realize like that doesn't have to let me stop at my skill level. You know, I can do other shit. I could do this, I can make YouTube videos. I can diversify my skill set. And I think that's a good mindset to have, like you did, where you see you're realistic about your goals and where you're at, and you use that to your advantage rather than being like, I don't know, sad or any of that shit, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And like, it's no matter no matter how good or bad you are, if art is subjective, someone's always gonna be like the best to you, and like the next person might look at them and be like, that's trash, bro. Like it doesn't matter. So like, why? I don't know why. You should just try to find like whatever your strengths are, play to them as much as possible, and just like keep it moving. But don't like look at the next designer and be like envious of their skill set. Like, unless you really want to do that. Like, I don't have the patience to be an illustrator, and that's just like because I'm very self-aware and I just can't do it. It'd be awesome if I could. It'd be a bonus, but like I know what my strengths are and I just play into those. And I think that's hugely important if you want to have longevity and have a career with design. Yeah,
I said this in the last podcast I recorded. It will have been out by now, but like I heard this quote. It was like, comparison is the thief of joy. And I really like that because, you know, anytime I'm looking at other shit that I'm like, fuck, like I don't know how the fuck that was done, or how am I going to do that? Or like, I want to do something like that. Unless I really want to do it, I'll try to figure it out. But just comparing yourself to other people isn't really going to get you anywhere. Rather, you could just focus on yourself, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Just enjoy what other people do. Like, and just like you said, like, if it's something you want to pursue or you want to like emulate, or like, you should try it. Like, maybe you're good at it. Like, you don't know, but like, yeah, it sucks. And it's just like the social media culture of like constantly comparing yourself to others. Another question I get all the time. It's like, I'm just, you know, Fuller, like I'm looking at X and Y, you know, designers, and like, how do I get to where they are? But like, you have to understand that, like, you know, you're looking at the iceberg, that it's the tip. Like, you just have to. I always emphasize like how every designer, every creative starts at zero. Like, you know, you don't come out of your mom's like with a mouse in your hand, like clicking around. Like you have to, you if it's, again, it just goes back to like, how bad do you want it? Like, then if you want it bad enough, you'll be able to recognize that there's going to be frustration along the way and just go through it, you know?
Mm-hmm. I find it funny, you know, I get asked stuff like that nowadays too, just from whatever followers or any of that. Like people will say like, how do you get like, what do they say? Like some version of the word like notoriety or something, right? How do you get this, or how do you get known or something? And I'm just like, I'm not known, bro. Like, I don't know. Like this shit is just, if you're talking about social media, like that shit's irrelevant. Like, it's not even about that either. Like if you want to ask me how to get skills, like here's this like avenue, here's this, but don't do something based off like getting popular or known or whatever. And if you're worried about that already, like it's going to be a long road ahead of you of comparing yourself to shit. 'Cause you're always going to be behind some other person, you know, unless you're literally the like greatest of all time at whatever you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And even then it's just, it's subjective. It's never, it's, you know, people look at like Tom Brady and you can use his statistics and say like, listen, on paper, he's the greatest of all time. And then someone will step in and say like, well, you forgot about this guy or whatever. But
yeah, from like the 30s or some shit.
Yeah,
like what about fucking Noam Johnson? And it's just like some like leatherhead ass dude. Yeah. I think that sports shit is also like, people are so biased of when they grew up. Like I think Michael Jordan's 100%. The GOAT, right? But I could understand why people think LeBron is or Kobe is, because they grew up seeing them do fucking fantastical shit, you know? So it's so hard to unattach like those biases from yourself. Like Kanye too. People that see what he's doing now, like the more he does wild shit, the more they're going to remove themselves from like how fucking dope he was and like all this crazy shit he was doing when he came up. So I don't know. Everyone, yeah, it just goes back to what you're saying about being subjective. Like even with this perfect stats, like the Tom Brady shit, like no one's going to care once they put their feelings into it and they say like, no, this guy's the best.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fun conversation to have, but that's kind of where I leave it.
When you're working with like, you know, Outkast or Gambino, whatever, you're working with this company that works with them, or how does that work?
It varies. Like I was fortunate enough that with Childish Gambino, I was working with him and his team at this merchandising company, and then I left, and then not long after he left. And since I became like homies with his like merchandising manager. And so at that point it was just like a matter of him, you know, texting or like emailing me and just being like, yo, like it's tour time, you know? So that was kind of a unique case, I'll be honest.
Right.
Mostly it's working with merchandising companies, but you get to know like the players, you know, at those companies, art director and project manager and things like that. So more often than not, that's the case. But when I was at the merchandising company, that's when the middleman is like a manager or the middle person is a manager. But yeah, I really love working directly with artists whenever possible. It can just be a little bit problematic because, you know, if they have a busy schedule, it's usually not the first thing on someone's mind. I will tell you though, I don't know if maybe this is like secret information, but like last week I did some merch for Miley Cyrus, and she actually is an artist that looks at her merchandise like and approves it. Like she actually approves it. And I don't think that is the case with most people at her level. And I thought that was cool. Like I respect that, you know?
Yeah. What's funny is I think that like the opposite of that is I've talked to people in bands and things on Instagram and stuff that are already like almost to this, you know, level where they would have the manager and all that shit, but they're just talking to the people directly still because maybe they blew up super fast. Like, you know, like I've talked to some vocalists of bands and I would think that, and I guess they're just the ones operating the, you know, design, like they're the client, you know, there's no even barrier between them, which I'm sure only lasts for so long. Once you get to like a big level, they make you kind of step in with a project manager and all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And like, even when your band, ascends to a certain level, there's usually like a person within the band who's like, they are like the merch person. Like everyone in the band trusts them to like make the right decisions. That was at least the case with a lot of bands that I worked with. There's just like always someone who is like, I'm like the artsy one in the band. Yeah, exactly.
That's dope. Well, that's like most of the questions I had for you and everything, man. So I do appreciate you coming on. And if everyone wants to check out, if you're not already familiar, Fuller.mo on IG, Fuller Mo on YouTube. Is that right too?
Fuller Mohagan on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah. All that shit. And anything else you want to plug or talk about before we get out of here?
Nothing else to plug. I appreciate you having me on. Mm-hmm. You already know this, but yeah, I just think you're a great host, and you ask really thoughtful questions. So keep it up. Like I really love what you're doing.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you next time. Peace out.